to the east of the city of Jerusalem, there's a little mountain. It's called the Mount of Olives. It's about 300 feet above the city of Jerusalem, a limestone ridge. It's about a mile in length. It's about 2,700 feet above sea level. And on the western slope of the Mount of Olives is a garden. If you go to Israel today, you can visit that garden. And in that garden, there's some beautiful shrubs, primarily olive trees. As a matter of fact, 8 ancient olive trees stand there. Some believe that they go back to the time of Christ. Their massive trunks are knotted and gnarled, and they stand like silent sentinels, watching over that garden where Jesus came to pray. We believe that it is the exact spot. Tradition all the way back to the 2nd century says this is the place where Jesus came to pray. It's Gethsemane. But this night was like no other night. Jesus had been up on Mount Zion. There in an upper room, he had the Last Supper with his disciples. He talked about his coming, crucifixion, and prior to that, his betrayal. You know, when the Lord Jesus began his ministry, when he was performing miracles, when he was feeding the multitudes, opening blinded eyes, healing withered limbs, oh, how the crowds followed him. Oh, they loved the miracles that he did. But when Jesus Christ began to speak to them of deeper eternal verities and full surrender to his lordship, they began to leave him. As a matter of fact, they left in droves. And the Lord Jesus had to turn to his disciples and say, will you also go away? And for multitudes now, he just has 12. But now one of the 12 has left. Judas has gone to betray him. Now he only has 11. But out of that 11, he chooses a trinity of disciples to come and watch and pray with him. Now he has 3, but those 3 fail him. They're asleep.
And in the most critical hour, when he needed that companionship, they failed him. And I say again, this got to me today. I believe this is the most critical hour in history, and the church is playing games. Can you see him there in Gethsemane? No visible audience, the disciples away there sleeping, demons looking on, angels looking on, the Father looking on. What does it say? Father, if it be possible, may this cup pass away from me, but if I drink it, then thy will be done. What was in that cup? And going down the street one day, it was 5 minutes of 5, I remember, and as I went past the door of this very humble kind of place, this lady put her head out and said, I know who you are, you're the pastor of the tabernacle. I said, that's right. I've been to the tabernacle. I usually sit at the back. I'm very poor, and I can't have anything to put in your offering. I said, all right. And she said, you come in my house and have a cup of tea. I said, no, I'm sorry, it's 5 minutes of 5, and I'm due for tea, as we say in England, or supper at 5 o'clock. No, that's not the reason. That's not the reason. You won't be coming because I'm poor. And it isn't a nice house like some of your folk are. I'll come in. I went in. Kind of a house you go in and hold your nose as you go in, you know. I've been in some pigsties of a house, but never one like that, I'll tell you that. I sat down at the table, and there was just about this much space to get from the front door, and it was all stacked up with books. She bought them at a junk shop down the road. She'd read thousands of them. The table was full. And there's a little space at the sink, and then there was a big sink. It was piled up with dishes. She hadn't had a washing up of dishes, I'm sure, for months. And there's a nice piece of bacon, and it was all green and moldy, you know. A real appetizing kind of thing. What do you call that stuff you get off mold? Penicillin. She'd $50 worth of penicillin on that thing, I'm sure. And she didn't even know. She said, you do drink tea? I said, yes. She said, all right. And she had a teapot that had been white once, and it was all messed up on the outside, and she reached in the sink and took a cup out that was all slimy on the outside, and as I looked in, it had tea leaves and some corruption in the bottom. And she just took that black tea and she poured it in that cup. And she said, "Do you take cream?" I said, "Yes, I do." She said, "I don't have any." "Do you take sugar?" "Yeah, I don't have any." You know, as she held, her fingernails were all in mourning. They were covered with dirt, and she held that filthy cup out with that rotten, cold tea, with no sugar, no cream, no anything. And I looked at it, and I guess I shrunk off from it, you know, and she said, "Drink it." You know, as I put my hand out to take that cup, right there, I've never forgotten it, my mind just went 2,000 miles away from England to a place called, at that time, Palestine, and 2,000 years back to this man in the garden when the Father said, "Drink it." Drink it.
Sometimes Jesus would pray standing. Sometimes Jesus would lift his face to heaven to pray. Sometimes Jesus would kneel and pray. But in Gethsemane, he fell on his face. Can you imagine what he must have looked like when Judas led that group into the garden? Can you see him? His face is matted with blood and dirt. Red blood and black dirt on his face. His heart is broken. This is the way they found him when Judas planted that kiss of shame upon the Lord Jesus Christ. He said, "My soul is exceeding heavy." The word heavy has the idea of being separated, alone. Before those nails ever went into the hands of Jesus, they had already come into his soul. Gethsemane was the vestibule of Calvary. The victory really was won in Gethsemane, not on Calvary. It was paid for at Calvary. It was won in Gethsemane. Jesus, knowing what he would go through. It is said that Nero had 40 men in his army. These 40 men were wrestlers. They were Nero's wrestlers, gladiators, who would come there to the field of endeavor, to the Agon, to wrestle for Nero. And they wanted to please their emperor. And as these 40 wrestlers would come there to wrestle before the emperor would sit there in his finery, in his velvet box, draped, sit there upon his throne and watch the games as these wrestlers would wrestle. They were the finest athletes in all of Rome. They would come out there with their square shoulders and bulging biceps, look up into the box of their emperor, and they would chant, "We are 40 wrestlers wrestling for thee, O emperor, to win for thee the victory, and for thee the victor's crown." Everybody in the empire knew who these wrestlers were. They were the counterpart of our Olympic champions today. Then word came to Nero that some in the army had become Christians. Christianity was beginning to spread. To be a Christian now was a crime worthy of death. Christians must be put to death by fire, by sword, by beast. And so Nero sent out a word to his commander-in-chief, Vespasian, and said, "You need to go through the ranks of your troops. If you find any Christians, they shall be executed." Vespasian lined his troops up, and he said, "An edict has come from the emperor. Should there be any Christians, I'm going to ask you to confess to being Christians. And I'm told that a Christian will never deny that he's a Christian. But I want to say before you confess that you are a Christian, if you do this, you will surely be put to death." Then Vespasian said, "Are there any Christians?" He wasn't prepared for what was about to happen, because as one man, 40 stepped forward. All 40 of these wrestlers had given their hearts, their lives to Jesus Christ. When Vespasian saw that, he said, no, there's some mistake. Not you 40. To a man, they said, we believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. Vespasian said, please, step back, renounce your faith, and it'll be over. Not a one of them moved. Vespasian said, I cannot put you to death with the sword. I believe you've not thought it through. Surely you'll renounce your faith. He said, I have a plan. It was in the middle of winter. Vespasian built a fire on a frozen lake, a big roaring fire. Then he took from those 40 men their helmet, their breastplate, their greaves of brass, their shoes, their shirt, their undergarments, stripped them down to absolutely nothing in that sub-zero weather, and turned them away in the darkness and said, you will stay out in the darkness until you freeze. But he said, if any of you out there in the cold and the darkness decide that you want to renounce Christ, all you have to do is come to the fire. Surely thinking they would come to the fire. Vespasian sent them out there, and the 40 men went out there. He wasn't prepared for what he was about to hear, because he heard the chant that he'd heard so many times, but now it was different. And this is what they were chanting: we are 40 wrestlers wrestling for thee, O Christ, to win for thee the victory, and from thee the victor's crown. Vespasian said, well, they're chanting now. But they will soon change. But on through the night, as the cold grew deeper, they heard this chant: 40 wrestlers wrestling for thee, O Christ, 40 wrestlers wrestling for thee, O Christ, to win for thee the victory, and from thee the victor's crown. It grew weaker and weaker and weaker. They were being numbed by the cold. But then the chanting stopped, and Vespasian looked, and there, slithering across the ice, was the naked form of one of those soldiers, turning his back on Jesus Christ, coming to the fire. Vespasian said, ha! Here he comes! The rest will soon follow. I knew it! I know men. The others will be coming soon. But he wasn't prepared for what he was about to hear. He listened, and he heard in the darkness, 39 wrestlers wrestling for thee, O Christ, to win for thee the victory, and from thee the victor's crown. When Vespasian heard that, and he looked at the miserable form before him slithering on the ice, according to the story, the way I heard it, Vespasian took from his head his helmet, took from his chest his armor, took from his back his shirt, from his feet his shoes, and ran toward the 39, saying, 40 wrestlers wrestling for thee, O Christ, to win for thee the victory, and from thee the victor's crown. Jesus wrestled for me. I want to wrestle for him. Don't you? Am I a soldier of the cross? I want to be. As I look at dark Gethsemane, I'll tell you the two things that it tells me. Number one, I want to hate sin, and number two, I want to love Jesus Christ. And so should every one of us.